Lines of track centers, high interference, high positions of programming. Calculate and modify lines. Okay, you see earth line track centers are 4 centers and sequence lines of communications. Retracted centers, A track lines, A centers, A interference, A positions. So you got A lines of settings, process lines of 4 set location of sequence. Okay, directing grounds, cross line angles. That's time measure, time scale, time balance. And then we change the scale communications, indirect signals of grounds to set position. Okay? Change course lines of time in that position of earth and lines of space. Earth, space. Capsule 1, capsule 2, 3, and 4. Overline sequence, graph line, centers of travel. Platforms of setting. Ground centers of earth line. Process lines indicate the system altered travel. Okay? Set lines, high centers of tone. Direct lines of earth over space. Tubing screens, directing the ground centers, offline communication 3 lines of 4, 5, 6, and set tractions. Directing ground centers, process lines of platforms and lines that equal lines of course centers, lines of travel. Sets calculation ground centers into fencing walls of communications. Directing ground centers, door recognition of 1, over lines of 3, set position of 6, and 8 lines of 12, and sets lines of travel. Directing ground centers, high lines of sequence, high lines of panels, in that communication system, high lines of surface. Then we go and you can calculate line screen adaptations of flux over lines, A force, directing ground centers, lines of setting. Process of indicating system, Fibonacci grounds, over sequence inside lines of travel to 3 centers of communications. 3 line directions, all right? 24 line sequence, 24 lines anomaly, and line course centers and cubicles and screen adaptations at 1 center in travel. Sets calculation of ground centers inside communications. Very complicated stuff, but a lot of fun. But you have to understand how it modifies the setting of structured design lines, right? Okay, bring it back in sequence, back in panel, back in operation system. Okay? So everything through the I-line center is the skeptical screen centers. It's the schematics over line. This is where we come to all levels of anti-mantle line centers. Okay, so track this communication lines of 3 centers of flux over 3, right? Travel point lines of 1 over 2 lines of 4. Travels endpoint lines of graph and set track center locations of stealth. Ground centers lines of 1, center lines of 2, 6, 8, 12, and 14, 6 lines of measure. Scales balance, sun codes, direct lines of ground center course centers. Tapestries and line rotations in 3 angles and 4 lines of graph communications. Okay? Okay, then we get into towers of indication system of travel. And then we get towers of communication lines of high lines of travel, and direct signals of grounds and high lines of surface of travel. And that communicates the system, right? Console centers, process lines of indicate the setting of flux over screen adaptation. Okay, track this communication high line signals. High line rotates the surface and travel communication setting of face recognition. Process indicates the settings over lines of flux, 3 centers of travel, 4 lines of graph inside position. Then we go to structure lines, 3 centers of travel, set position of 4 centers of the lines of travel, communication of towers of communication. Ground centers, cross line 45 angles of 3 centers of 4, cross lines of 4 centers, lines of 6 over travel. Directing ground centers, high lines of yards, meters, and scale, process communication system, all through travel communications. Okay? All right, center calculations of 3 angles, 4 gravel, 2 line centers of travel communications. Now it gets more complicated because we're going through line signals and settings of travel and platforms of set position. Okay? Now we cross the angles, 3 centers in rainbow graph screens and echo 1 sonar, Zulu Fox line 1. Okay? Process the indication system, all through travels, indirect signals of ground communication of surface. I sequence lines of wall sequence, ground centers inline rotations, wall centers of travel, 3 centers of set position all levels. The I sequence lines of its panels, process communicates the setting of travel communications. Now we go to the opposite line centers, line communication its modem, 4 signals like ground communications, right? So remember, we live in a virtual reality, and everything you see is its own line setting, location setting that's done through its schematics and its perspective. You see everything perspective. So you see the grounds, you see the panels, okay, grounds, panels, atmosphere, guys. Simple. Very simple to understand how everything's structured through schematics, your own engineers. So in setting lines of sequence, we have an A factor, 2 A-line screens, 3 A-line sequence, and triangulation of 4. Opens up the window frame and travel in-front lines in travel communications, the front line and travel. Directing ground centers in position of Stargate 1, Stargate 6, and Stargate 9. Sets lines of 12 in position of 24 line sequence of panels of communication setting to its console in position of flight navigation system at travel. Ooh-ah. So we send the lines of communication setting all through line core centers and travel. Boom. Okay, see that? See the center core setting? Time reactor line center operation sequence. 3 centers of travel. Crosses the webbing screens and 4 angles in travel communications and towers of communication. Very complicated stuff, but it's a lot of fun if you get true understanding of what your sky looks like. Okay, so we got indicate ground center, so let's get into red signals, high center line communications. Now I'm giving you guys in setting lines. This is set in position of 24,000 years in the future line. 24,000, that's coming in sequence. So we indicate position of programming, directing lines in flux over line, body interference, 3 angle point lines that security lines of measure and scale. Sets calculation lines of blue flames, high centers lines of travel. Triangulation lines of 1 center, operation sequence. Course the channels in positional levels in CCTV, FAA, EFTA, and position IPA and travel communications. Right? Directing ground centers, we get in-line screen adaptation. That's where it gets really complicated. The green line centers has 2 line signals. But we indicate the pattern. We rotate the system of travel that change the light metaphors in travel communications. Right? Now we change the angles of points. We indicate the flux. It's like I said, is paint by number. All we're doing is we're synchronizing the line can synchronizing line centers into synchronicities, directing inline links into flux over line and 4 centers of travel. This overcrosses the signals into modulation center interference and program calculation screen adaptation. Okay? Sets calculation ground centers in high centers of 7 sequence. 7. Sets position of 0, 0, line rotations of bracket over screen. Okay? That's the indication of line grounds and high lines of sequence location of pattern. Very powerful stuff in travel communications. So we own online centers, we set position of triangulation interference of interforce. 4 signals, lines of grounds, and set calculation system, all 2 lines of blue settings and high rotation surface interaction. Then we come into high course centers and 1 signal, set lines of 2 lines and 3 center interference. Process the indication system, cloak and dagger, process lines of 1 indications, over line or cross over signal location. Now we indicate the centers and cross the angles of point communication to geo pattern. Process the indication setting over line inside position lines of travel. Okay? Inside communications comes into 3 course centers of travel, right? 3 directions. That process lines the indication lines of north and east and west and south and travel communications. Right? Then we get in indicate lines, center interference. So I'm getting you guys more of the security line and travel communication of line, what it is in the virtual reality of the setting. Let's indicate the system of travel. Cross the angles of point communication system through all error indication setting of travel communications. The highways. Highways get a lot more tricky now because you're reaching higher communications. So we got indication lines in purple with 3 angles and 4 communication setting of travel. The ground centers of surface. High centers in that communication, high set position location of solar streams. Directing lines of traffic inventory of flow. Setting line communications in its position location to its system. Okay? Outline signal location to its travel, but it's there in indication, right? So it has a compilation center, process communication lines into green line and center of position. Crossing signals, this is where it comes into the efficacy performance of 4 signals crossing angles in 4 settings. We cross lines of center and security in defense line position over cross line. Now we go through the open window frame, process lines of 2 tubings and 4 ground centers and high lines of surface and travel into data formation lines of files and travel communications. That indicates the grounds and high lines of service in location system, all through traction. Okay? Setting lines of point lines of grounds, right? So that indicates lines at birth line 1, set it in rotation to its setting. Okay? Then we cross the angles, and they go through the perimeters and 4 lines of flux over webbing. And then we come outline signal, process the indication system through X marks the spot and travel. Okay, 2 signal lines of grounds. All right, so we send out communication lines, purple comes in. So the indication of the highways, guys, constantly change the seconds, minutes, and hours in frame. It's just you constantly getting up in the morning, seeing all levels of you are just existing in the future. Future is existing on a constant, continuous flow. And for you guys to identify that is all through traction, right? So everything you do never, ever stops running its system. It's constantly moving in traction. So I'm trying to get you guys to understand how this works with the ebb and flow of everything, location of its structure, of its design. You know how to work in the line course centers and outline division in set tractions, right? This is a map, okay? Everything's made through schematics in a map line center. Crossing the angles. Now, in that position, if you want to collapse timelines, you got to get in solar graph screens. It sets position locations of cloak and daggers, 4 signals and ground centers lines of surface. Process 45 angles and 3 grounds and set position lines of travel. 4 signals, 5 centers, 6 lines of 8 over traction, right? Bring it in, okay? There's the map, a new mapping sequence. These are door recognition of time center. Each door has a recognition center. Process indicates the setting, there's the traffic, there's the inventory, okay? Crossing angles, in set position point lines of graph, okay? Center calculation setting, open signals, location system, interactions. Wall sequence, line condition setting to your pyramid and travel. There's your pyramid. High signal lines of grounds over line centers and 3 travel communications at line setting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Sets position, right? Overline signals, ground centers, lines of surface. Okay, probing. Direct lines of 1 center, 1 process. So you can do a probe in position inside traction, right? And then you color it in, and you can come into anything line screen adaptation, right? So it's floating into mechanism lines of time and travel and high centers of travel communications. Directing course lines, directing lines of blue surface and travel communications. Now it's becoming more mass, more volume, more width, more dynamic, more connected in that position location of travel, right? Directing ground centers inside position location to its planet. There's the planet, okay? That's Venus. So, how you come to coordinates is knowing how to get into your equilibrium. You balance your communication system all through travel, but it has a direct line center in locations. You can overline sequence location of systems, right? Now it's Jupiter, right? Change the coloration lines and position locations. Let's get in line course centers in position. Now it's Pluto, right? And then you could add schematics over line, over pi, over traction, over division, over locations. But you have to get back into black line center and process communication inset lines of 4 triangles and position lines of center. Process indicates the inside line rotations. Let's get into orange. Orange lines, 4 sequence lines of panel communications. Okay, inside, outside line centers in rotation through surface of travel. And then we come to cubical lines, high travel point lines of graph. We'll go through gray of interference into star graph, 1 center, 1 travel, 1 communications. Probing of detection, right? 4 signals, lines of grounds. Then we add pink in center in operation of sequence and travel communications, all right? And then we change the time sectors in rotation surface and travel. Mercury. So it's amazing how you can change the planetary surface and location to its system. So understanding the angle points is knowing exactly everything that you change, you can copy and paste, but you can't do that until you get in your 12 centers. See, this is an I sequence lines and a black surface line screen adaptation of system. That's a solar graph interference. Sets I line centers into spectacle screen adaptation with flux. And set traction. There's the sun. The sun is inside, but the sun's everywhere. Okay, the sun is not just in one position. It's flashing charges everywhere in seconds, minutes, and hours through clocking. The foundation grounds, high lines and signal location system all through travel. Okay? Okay, and this position lines and cross lines sets position location of systems all through traction. Look at this. Alright, so I'm gonna bring in, okay, there's the moon. Okay? The sun and the moon are always together, right? They're never separated, right? But if you change the angles, look at this in travel. Look at the galaxies. Look at the planets. It's amazing how your mind just adapts to everything in setting its lines of travel, right? But you've got to get at a coexisting of everything you see. That puts you in the virtual reality of all levels of you, just existing and evolving, expanding yourself. And every time you change the coordinates and every time you change the time, you can do anything you want in coloration lines of light metaphors. It processes the communication system to its planetary setting of its solar system and travel. Okay? Very powerful that. See? It's all inside you, but you see it projection outside, which is amazing. All right, setting line screens. We'll set a set position, location, measure, and scale. Formula equation lines of 1 factor per line. Setting panels. The process indication setting and travel. So it has 1 signal, 1 arrows of indication setting, 3 lines of zeros. Set calculation. Okay. Gravicode 1, Gravicode 2. Right. Gravicode 4. Set lines of signals, cross line angles, and 2 arrows of indication setting of flux. All you're creating is a teleportation vessel. That's all you're doing. Nothing else, nothing more. Okay? Sets lines of its compass. Your direct inventories has a course centers of travel. Fibonacci one way and Fibonacci the other way in travel communication. Right? Process the indication setting. Inlines, set lines of communication setting of 6 and 9. See? Inside traction. Right? Scales of communication lines of meters, crosses angles, and 4 communicates the system all through travel. Files. Sets calculates inside rotation setting at surface. 8 tractions, 8 lines, 8 signals, 8 rotations, 8 surface and travel. Okay? And then you do flux over line, directing ground centers, and circuitry screen lines adaptations of flux over line. 8 central lines in a particle acceleration system of space and time. Okay? So everything is just travel. Everything has to be travel. Everything is always traveling, but everything is created through all levels of different levels of traveling. But you've got to be in the metaphysical line, because if your body's not in the metaphysical line, it can't start up its engine, it can't motivate its system, it can't get in its mobilities, it can't get in its activity screen, it can't get into its human residence. See, the body itself can morph into anything that it sees in tractions, but you have to let go of the coexistence of the body itself, which is the earth itself. You're not in the physical of anything. And the more you come into the adaptation system, the more you see everything is all levels, of nothing in track lines, in that position locations, and all line communication interference, puts all position location system to your imagination system in traction. Okay? Very powerful stuff, see? Everything's already created. I said that before. So when you're creating something, you created it. That's what it is. That's a simulation. So simulation's already done. You're looking at all levels of the shapes. You don't have to do anything. It's all done. Now the body has to come into the network now, right? Of what it's already done through its system. Portals and stargates, anything could travel. All right? So now getting into travel gets more complicated, because the thing is, let's say you get up in the morning. Okay, let's say it takes about 45 minutes to an hour to get ready, depending on sign locations, 30 minutes to get to work. Okay, so you're here, right? But what you have to understand is this is already here. So for you to understand that, you have to understand the center operation of you is just existing. That's all it is. So if you understand the existing, you understand the high, from above and below. See? There's a metric meter of scale that processes communication, how you see things of question up and question down, and set tractions, right? Get in that positions, you can morph into anything that you see in travel communications, right? But it's all in the eye center of all position location system of travel, the eye itself. So the eye can go anywhere it wants in that position location because it's inside line tractions, and that comes into the conception of the brain. The brain is the conversion system, which is basically, like I said, without the brain, you wouldn't have a map of where you're going to be next. The brain itself is its map, guys. The clouds are the metaphors and screen adaptation system, which is the membrane. That processes the communication of its brainstem that connects to all levels of the cerebro. The cerebro is a coliseum. So that position of its coliseum itself has massive, massive highways and travel of communication. Hallways. As hallways, tunnels, set tractions, right? All through the center operation of you in set position. Okay? So as you're expanding, you're exploring new inventory. new grounds, new surface, new traction, right? Understand the high centers, which is your flywheel that always stays in center of operation. If not, it's this way in travel communications. Or it's this way in travel communications. Okay, or it's this way in travel communications. Right? So you have to know yourself in all directions. That's all it is, right? So in that settings, understand the connections of your networks. The body is merging, okay, into the set lines into the AVR, which is the connection system where it comes into the atmospheres to its vast volume, velocity, and vacuum. Now it's an evac line. One line centers A. Position lines of travels. A lines centers. Process lines of B. C lines, D lines of track centers. Equals lines of question. The process of indication setting of travel. Now we have a question line, which is the underscore, outside location system and travel. Okay, above and below, right? Synchronized center lines and travels in point line communication, right? Directing grounds is a high line centers to your Earth and 12 line rotations. Ground center lines of 1, ground center lines of 2, 3, 4, and 5 lines of measure and scale communication. Ground centers, high signals, location setting to above the system location, which is your constellations. The wind factors over line, E factors over weather, screen adaptation, flux over 1, and set traction. High signal lines of grounds, XT1000 platform. XT1000 platform is 144. Once you get to 144, you see them in provision. Docking centers, lines, launch pads, all communications, docking bays, hangar bays, and travel communications. Setting lines of travel. Directing ground centers, high lines of service. Now, if you look really close, you can see the face recognition system all through travel. Oh yeah, right? So, it's really understanding what's really going on with your system inside tractions, guys. Okay? Very powerful stuff. Once you understand what's happening to you inside your system. Okay? Inside your system. This and travel. Okay? All right. So we got metrics and meters, meters and scale, balance calculation, screen adaptation, and systems. So when you get up in the morning, everything's done. There's nothing for you to do. All you're doing now is you're reaching higher levels of what everything has been in process of, is basically you just come into the existing and evolving yourself now. Okay? You're not in position of all levels of coexisting. You're in position of just existing itself. You've always been existing. So you've always been there. You know what I mean? So how you determine that is to codify everything, is to keep yourself in the virtual reality of itself. That's what puts everything in balance and everything that you see. So the more you break these things down, you codify your systems in graph of communications, right? And then you triangulate the spot lines and 3 centers of travel. And then you set position of ground centers and location system all through road graph of communication. Right? See that? See the towers going this way, right? So the cars are going this way in travel. Very powerful stuff in set traction. Okay? Cars are going this way, right? And then we got a center calculation screen lines adaptation of entry point to an exit point in that position. Center operation screens, XT1000s coming out in set position. Right? So, understand the virtual reality is understanding its position of its mirror resolution of travel on all different angles, right? One angle on screen, okay? Setting lines like screen adaptation of 3 angles on screen, okay? 17 line screen adaptations of flux, 1 measure scale and rotation system at scan, directing ground centers, high lines of service, and travel communication setting and ground communication, right? Remember, it's a 4 communication settings of angles and travel communications, guys, okay? Center operation, center calculation screen, and a half pipe and screen adaptation of system off the travel, okay? So it's amazing what you can do when you change the anomalies and set travel communications, okay? So you always bring it back home, which is your fail safe. Make sure you're in position lines of high centers. Make sure you didn't miss anything through line signals, right? Because it's very important. Because if you're doing a 4-track center, set in position of 4 centers to travel, right? And you turn this, is it still there? Yes, it is, right? So your mind's already in control. right? It's in control of the 4 flux, right? You still see the lines, right? If not, you have to go back. That's what puts you in motion, right? So it's all good to go. If I get back on the safe, there it is in travel communications. Now you can keep continuing through existing, right? Process of indication 3 centers of travel. Let's change it again. Has it changed? It's still there? Yes, it is. So we bounce here, bounce here, bounce here, bounce here. Now we can travel. We can travel now, right? Because it's all set up, right? As it's set up, you travel inside lines, 3 centers of travel. Start with that position, right? And then you travel inside line centers, a 3 set position of travel. And then you come in your position location system, which comes into your pyramid. Okay, your pyramid's always in that setting. The astral projections, astral connections, astral line centers of travel. There's your pyramid, right? And then you indicate 4 lines of signals in wall lines of sequence and set position lines of communications. Okay, and then you change the ground centers to its center line of position location setting. Process indicate line centers, 3 centers in rotation surface and travel. Process indication cross line angles that puts position of direct, redirect, and online center location of travel. Sets calculation centers in location system to your simulation graph. Okay, that's all it is. It's all set position of travel. All right. And then you work with inside lines. XT1000 here, XT1000 here, XT 1000 frame, XT200, and a mothership in travel. Okay, but look at this. See? It's inside, outside line centers and location and systems. Right? So everything you structure is basically understanding the 4 grounds of setting. So you got 4 grounds position, you got 4 grounds line communications to its powers, and you got 4 grounds of its atmospheres, right? So that's 4, line communications 8 position lines of 12. So 4, 4, 4. So you got 4 lines of sequence lines in set position of 0, 0, 0. Set tractions into 0, 0, 0, 1. Set position location of 0, 0, 0, 2. Okay? So you got 4, 8, 12. Right, setting sequence of 12 here sets position of 24 in center of operation sequence. Set calculation line screen adaptation setting. Flux over lines indicate cross angles in point communication settings of graph. Set lines on line center, outside line locations. Right? So that indicates lines of one planet's setting in process of Jupiter or lines of Mercury or location system, all through planetary lines of coordinates and travel communication. Okay? So as we get in that position, like we bracket the 0, 0, 1, 3 lines of indications, cross lines, over lines of setting, process lines at set position of 0, bracket lines of 3 line centers, line position equals lines of 1, lines of 1, travels into point lines, bracket lines of 3 lines of zeros, sets position over 2, sets lines of 3 over lines of 2 over track centers, in position of 1 center, in process in position locations to 144 platform, in position lines of travel. Okay? So it gets more complicated when you really get in the position of higher lines of sequence. Okay? All right, so we got line course centers, process of indications, process line divisions, process high center calculation, and process of line rotation settings. Okay? Wall line screens and adaptations of flux. Remember, you got to get in position to its virtual reality to see it through schematics of what's going on in set position, right? And then we can ground lines 1, 2, platforms of 3 lines into echo and 2, taxi runway. Taxi runway is coming in, process line indication settings. Let's get indication grounds, all right? Center calculation line 60 here. Needs its docking, right? So it's docking center over here, launch pad 2, 3, 4, and 6 line communications. Hangar 6, 8, and 12, and hangar bay and travel communications. All right? So, it's complicated if you don't understand the virtual reality of where you live in real time. Okay, because everything is, it's complicated if you don't really understand where you are. It's not just being in your mind, it's living in your mind on a day-to-day basis. We really do live, guys, in real time. But there's a very high line in schematics of our line into formulated equations, okay? So you guys are your own engineers. Now's the time to really adapt and understand how to use that in a source of recognition. Force of recognition, pattern recognition, weather pattern recognition, position location of force calculation lines and screen adaptations, or anything facades of recognition, which is face recognition. So we have to really start to identify how we work with ourselves through our set position, our tool sets that we have, and understand how to use that through its brain convergence, and knowing how to use it through its mapping sequence. So if the network's already done and everything's done through its equation, okay, what's next in settings? Nothing. Just keep existing and evolving yourself. That's all you have to do. You don't have to do anything else. Everything's come to you now in vision. Everything's come to you in precog. Everything's come to you in position, right? Because you already brought it in through attraction. So when you get up in the morning, you already got up. So if you're going through 7 days is already done. You're just going through the network now, and you're going through the windows, which is putting you guys into more mocking and setting lines of travel in communication of schematics, your dockings, your launch paths, your flight manifest, your navigations, your set position of travels, okay, your docking stations, all that communication system all through travel. Navigator to navigation, right? So your window frames are just coming to you now in sequence, all through order of set position, right? Data 1, data 2, data 3, data 4. Okay, that's coming to you already in sequence. You're here in setting, you're just picking up the files that you already have in travel in communication. That's it. So we got position location settings, let's say 500,000 lines of files, 750,000 lines of files. Remember, it's in the same date sequence, just different lines of calculations. 3 centers of 0 and 3 centers of set track communications. Right? Directing ground centers, high lines of set position. Okay? Process the portals and stargates and screen adaptations of flux that sets lines communication system, high lines of surface and travel. Really complicated stuff when you understand how to go through portals and stargates, and a part accelerates the screen's adaptation system of seconds, minutes, and hours. Processing that is nanoseconds, minutes, and hours of frame. And once we get into that position locations, then we're just existing at any speed we want to be in, because we're processing the more of the mind now. We're in the process of the communication system. We're truly understanding that we are in the virtual reality of ourselves. So we just basically, if we're already existing, we're just expanding. Because everything's done through its equation, and everything's coming to you, not coming back to you. It's just coming to you now in vision at a higher frequency. And the more you see these things, the more you adapt. And the more you adapt, the more you get less confused of where you are in your bodies. And then you realize, wow, this is powerful stuff. So when I get up in the morning, I'm not getting up to the morning. I'm getting up to the morning I've already been in, which means that day, that 24 hours is done. That 2 days is done. That 3 days is done. That 2 months is done. So if you realize coming into that position, you start to see the vision faster. Because you're now coming into yourself, okay? Not the self that you think you are. Know who you are, of where you've always been in that set position location of travel, the travel communications. And you see it on all different formation lines at different angles. All through travel, all through indication setting, all through flux. Okay? Very powerful stuff in travel. And you travel through it. Okay? So as the inner spectrum and outer spectrum of light in communication with surface and travel, right? But that's what's happening with everybody in set position. You're just coming onto your files that you already received. There's nothing to do, there's nothing to achieve. That's basically what it is. And if you get a true understanding and you let yourself go, release everything, that puts more of communication sitting, is to come into the mind of empty space. The mind of empty space is who you always are, not what you're coming into. You're not coming into anything. You're just identifying how to get into all levels of you, just existing, and now just evolving and expanding yourselves. But where you are, continue on and coming into new cycles. New collective of this, new collective of that, collecting this and collecting that. But you're collecting new. You're not processing what you created. So that's the difference, right? So when you're doing things, you're creating. But when you understand what you did, your creation. So the creation, the creating is a constant, continuous flow of you just keep existing and evolving yourselves. That's all it is in Tractions. Nothing else, nothing more. All right? All right, so hopefully that helps you guys out in sending lines of travel. Okay? Adios.